So my name's Diana Hiebert. Thank you to the NI Dev Conference for allowing me to speak, as well as to my workplace, Carrick, who's a sponsor for this event. So my title is a bit of a weird one. It is Recruiting the Reluctant Stakeholder, What Waking Up at 4 a.m. to Clip Sheep in the Rain Taught Me About My Stakeholder Segment. We'll get into that, I promise. So a little bit about me. I'm Canadian from near Vancouver. You might be able to tell from my accent, hopefully. I moved to Belfast a little over a year ago, and I've been enjoying it. So today in this talk, we're going to cover my journey to UX, an intro to the case study that I'll be sharing with you today, and we'll go through the UX process that took me from discovery, exploration, testing, and some key tips and tricks for listening to your stakeholders. So first off, my journey to user experience. So I started off actually by studying art and design and art history. I have a whole career. I know that I'm not the only one here who has a background in art, so I don't feel as alone. But I started off curating, and as part of that, I was creating what we like to call as engaging user or visitor experiences in the museum world. So looking at everything from the physical and emotional experiences of our stakeholders who walk through the gallery and considering that. Then the pandemic happened and all of my work moved online and I became a content creator. So that's when I first became interested in UX. And I discovered this course at Ulster University, and I shipped myself off to Belfast. And that's where I discovered Carrick, actually. So I recently started at Carrick as a graduate UX designer, and I can't share too much about that because I've signed an NDA, but I will be sharing a bit about the final project that I worked on and I hope to develop. So let's get into the case study. So here you can see one of the marketing images that I kind of ended up with. So this is kind of the end of the project as it was worked out. So this is a farmer dashboard, and it considers everything from the organization of animals to different things that go in with maintaining a farm, as well as looking at carbon data and how farmers can collect that on farm and use that to their advantage as they kind of transform the supply chain, hopefully. So why was I interested in creating a farmer dashboard? Well, I wanted farmers to be able to benefit environmentally from these changes as well as economically. So as you'll all know, the UK has a net zero target to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And it got me thinking, what does this look like for the future of farming? So a recent lecture that I listened to by Professor John Gilliland, who's a agricultural policy researcher as well as a farmer himself, he explained this as the average of all farms across Northern Ireland, in this case, would be zero. So some farms offsetting other farms that will never be able to reach net zero themselves. So let's look at the supply chain a little bit more. Here we've got the farmer who, and I'm looking specifically at beef, sheep, and dairy farmers who raise the animals, and then they send this produce to the meat processor in this case, and they send it to the retailer like your local Tesco, and you're able to buy that in stores. So this situation is an interesting one because the farmer needs to produce low carbon produce in this futuristic world, and the retailer, as I've found out, needs to also sell low carbon produce. But what happens in between? So the meat processor is the one that's setting the fixed price that the farmer needs to cater to. However, the farmer at this stage doesn't have any way of being compensated for creating low carbon produce. So before I go any further, I just want to mention I'm going to be using stakeholders and users interchangeably for this project. For me, a stakeholder for this project is a person with important insight who stands to gain or lose from the project. So all of these were my stakeholders, but today we're going to focus on the farmer stakeholder. I wanted to know, can we create a tool that encourages the UK and Irish farmer to lower carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions, like methane, while also benefiting economically from this effort? And we're going to look at this in 4 different steps. So this looks a lot like our UX process, the way that we move through determining problems and responding to them. So from discover to explore to test to listen. Let's start with discover. So discover current problems. So we know that farmers in the UK and Ireland, from my research, feel far removed from government-mandated sustainability ventures, frustrated by decisions made on behalf of their sector by meat processors who are deemed untrustworthy by the farmers, or some farmers, I can't speak for them all, and frustrated by the time it takes to do repetitive data entry on a day-to-day level. So I turn these problems into an opportunity statement. So how might we use technology to improve the pain points that farmers experience when making government-directed sustainability changes on farm? So this is one of my stakeholder segments, as I've mentioned. And when I was approaching this project, I knew that there would be a variety of different responses from different members of that core stakeholder segment. So some of the people that I interviewed were really enthusiastic about the project. Some were curious, some were neutral, some were not interested, and some were downright opposed. The enthusiastic and curious farmer stakeholders that I chatted with had a clear stake. They knew that their business, the way that their business was set up, would clearly benefit from this type of venture, and so their buy-in was easy to get. The curious ones could also just see that this was coming down the pipe anyways, and they wanted to kind of find out more and get on board. But today we're going to focus on those reluctant stakeholders, those who were neutral, not interested, and opposed. And I'm hopefully going to be able to convince you, share with you that their opinions are actually some of the most valuable. So discover through connection. How do you find these reluctant voices? They don't want to be found. So for me, someone who's a Canadian blow-in, it was really important for me to kind of team up with someone who had contacts within the industry in the UK and Ireland. So for me, that was Josh Thompson, who is a Queen's University Belfast researcher focusing on carbon emissions. And he helped introduce me to some of these more reluctant voices. Now let's get to that subheading. So I wake up one morning and I'm not a morning person, by the way, but I wake up at 4 a.m. and I find myself in a farmyard, and we're working on clipping sheep together with this new friend that I made, introduced to me by Josh Thompson, my partner in this project. And I was there basically to learn the ins and outs of this farmer's day. What was important to him throughout the day? What tasks did he enjoy doing? What did he not enjoy doing? This was very exploratory. And I learned a lot about what this stakeholder felt about the project in general. And one of the probably key comments that he made to me was that he was most interested in the farming lifestyle over any sort of business venture, even if it could bring him economic benefit. And I found this to be an interesting comment, and something that I kind of thought, this might be not just this one person's opinion, this might be more common. So that's what started me off, and it really propelled the project forward. How do we reach these people with these perspectives, or maybe we need to change the product a little bit. So the second section is exploring the problem. So I'm a user user experience designer, so user research is really important to me. And I just wanted to draw on this quote by Apurva Ghosh, also a UX designer, who says, "User research provides an essential foundation for design strategy. It helps you to create an optimal product for users. Most importantly, you'll have the data to back your strategy and design decisions," which is what we all want to mend. So what did I do? So I interviewed 5 different farmers, 3 of which I'm going to call that fell in kind of the reluctant camp. And we just had open-ended discussions on a range of topics, including record keeping, how did they, maintain their day-to-day records, to the technology that they used, whether that be a paper calendar or a notes app on their phone, or maybe more complicated types of technology like other apps or things. And what are their feelings about government sustainability ventures in the first place? So here's just an example of some of the research that I compiled. So you've got 4 different farmers up there, and they're kind of color-coded, and I was just collecting kind of main themes and ideas and grouping those together. Some of them that I mentioned before, like the emphasis on technology, some key quotes I'll just share with you here. The one up on the screen is, farmers want it all kind of linked up so that they can replicate this data. So farmers are often asked to do repetitive data entry. So how do we do that? How do we create a product where they can just do it once and move on with their day? Another comment from a farmer was, springtime is a lot busier, so the biggest problem with technology for us is actually using it when you're out on the farm. And then the third comment I'll share with you is a comment where this one younger farmer talked about how her sister would use her phone to keep track of a lot of records, and they'd send like video or photo messages to one another to keep track of, like, say, an injured animal out in the field. And so all of that research I developed, or I brought together and created a fictitious persona. So you might be familiar with personas like these before. So this person, I called him James Mackey. He's 65 years old. He is introverted with a dry sense of humor, naturally suspicious, but opens up when you get to know him. Has a wife and 2 adult children who help him on the farm, and values this lifestyle over business, and uses his iPhone to call processors, to make notes about the herd. And finally, but most importantly perhaps, is he's afraid that products with a focus on carbon data will give farmers like him less autonomy over his business. So how do I create a product for this kind of persona? So I listened to my stakeholders, and I started ideating, coming up with a few different wireframes, and maybe I'll backtrack a little bit. I didn't actually intend to create a companion app for this dashboard, but because of the feedback from the stakeholders, I found that I needed to take this into consideration. So this is me kind of thinking through, okay, how do we create a note-taking app that will then feed into the dashboard later on? Next stage is testing. So you may be familiar with some of these usability testing strategies. These are kind of like the bread and butter of what we do in UX. And so I used, here they are. So the time to complete the task, writing down what users are actually saying during these interviews, and the number of tasks successfully completed, along with a system usability scale at the end of the test, which kind of gauges how likely the user will use the product again. I'll just flip back here, which is to talk about some of the 4 scenarios. So some of the main things that I wanted tested were the active recording an animal birth on your phone, which then would be updated later onto the dashboard, recording a note on your phone that would link to everything else in the dashboard, checking the location of the animals and where they were on the farm, as well as sharing a carbon report with meat processors. So here's some of the test results. I learned a lot from these tests. Not being a farmer myself, I had a lot to learn about the language that the farmers were using. So making the language of the product more familiar to them was absolutely key. So for instance, me using something like the mother ID, the animal's mother ID, and that being something that the stakeholder would call out to me during that test, and then it was changed to the correct word, which is the term, the dam ID. And then another example of how the test really benefited the product was hearing from, so here I'll just share, I've got a before and after kind of image of the dashboard where I'm asking the farmer to create a report on their carbon data, so their sources and sinks. So what's creating the carbon, what is also sinking the carbon, like offsetting it. So during the testing, the farmer asked a really good question. Why would I want to share all this with the processor? Why can't I share more individualized content that makes more sense? So after testing, I thought, that's a really good point. We want to be kind of more responsive to what the farmer's needs are, and they don't necessarily have to share all of this content. So I included kind of a more responsive section, so where farmers, like in this example, the farmer can select the live weight of the beef being produced and how much carbon equivalent is being produced per kilogram per year. And then also a preview selection option, so you can review those selections. Next is listing. Sorry, I know we're running over a little bit, but we're almost at the end. So listening between the lines here. So just a few tips and advice from what I learned. So really listening during the interview so that you can ask those probing follow-up questions, as well as re-listening to interviews after they've been done, so that you're not so worried about facilitating anymore. You're actually just listening to what people are saying. Next is listening and encouraging. So reminding users that they are the experts of their own experiences. I had lots of stakeholders who would say to me, well, I just do it this way. I don't think you should really be asking me for my opinion. But I actually found that a lot of these comments that they would make became kind of the majority. So like a lot of them were saying like, oh, I do it this way, but there was a number of different people saying the same thing. So really reminding users that they are the experts. I'm here to learn from them in the interview. And then listening and empathizing rather than defending my product. This was really key for me because a lot of the more reluctant farmers would say, these other products, they want to take advantage of us in these different ways. And I had to just stay quiet in that moment and not try and defend my own product. So this is something really key in those moments for me. A quote by Patrick Naroki, who says, "Opportunity is murdered every time you let ego speak instead of hearing what others want to say." So just to review, so combining some of the feedback, I don't have enough time to track that info, and farmers need one product that does everything, combined with the observed familiar tools like using an iPhone app, using the Notes app on their phone, and then combining the usability test results helped me create a product that I could kind of stand behind. So I'll just share a section of the companion app here. This is just a very short clip where the stakeholder is being asked to add a note to the companion app. So here they're adding the note, clicking on selecting a photo, and next they're going to start typing a note. This was really informed by the user interviews using the language. So that's it, very quick. And then ultimately, so this note was added, and then you'll see here the note shows up on the dashboard. How do you think my farmer stakeholders responded? I'll just let you think about that as we're running out of time. So I was surprised by the number of positive feedback. One said, I could have really used your product yesterday when I was out in the field. You really need to get this product on the market. And I like the look and feel of it so much better than some of the other products that I've used. So I kind of attribute this to listening to the users throughout the process, listening to those reluctant stakeholders. So what did waking up at 4 a.m. to clip sheep in the rain teach me? First of all, it helped me to develop rapport, to understand what these stakeholders really cared about and were concerned about, and it helped me to shape the product with the help of real insight on real behavior. So finally, a few takeaways, things from each of those different 4 sections that we're talking about. Spend time understanding the context, immerse yourself in the stakeholder's experience during the interview or throughout the process if you're not conducting interviews yourself. Test the product, not the person using it, and practice empathetic listening that makes space for bigger opportunities. And finally, I'll just end with this quote that I kind of want to take the knowledge that I learned from this into my future career. So Elena Villamate, who's a developer, says, if the whole team understands context, understands users, and has empathy for the user, the team can function better together, working towards a common goal, delivering successful outcomes for the user. Thanks so much.